The world has never been without teachers. Each age has its teachers. Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Buddha, and Muhammad were some of the great ones. But after those, there are always special beings, perfect representatives of the messages brought by God's messengers. Rumi is one of them, one of those complete human beings. He is one of the greatest Islamic scholars, though he is known as the most outstanding and best-selling mystical poet in the West.
Rumi is, of course, a 13th century man who was born to scholars, and his father was a great scholar, considered the greatest scholar of his time. He was born, I believe, in what is now Afghanistan.
Rumi was one of the greatest poets and spiritual masters probably of all mankind. He was born in 1207, September 30th, in Balkh.
He was born in 1207 in Balkh, in present-day Afghanistan, but lived, taught, died in 1273 and was buried in Konya, in present-day Turkey, under the Turkish Empire, the Seljuks.
Because of the turmoil in the world at the time, particularly caused by Mongolian invasions, his family had to move around, and they were in Mecca, they were in Medina, but they ultimately ended up in Anatolia. And it's from this place that I believe his name came, because Rumi means the land of Rum, and Anatolia was that land. And he spent the rest of his life there.
He was a father, husband, and university professor. He merged all these aspects of life into a unified existence. He linked all of his life with the thought of God and the practices toward humanity that this thought manifests. Thus, he became one of the greatest teachers of universal love and peace. Jalaluddin married and lived with his wife, Gevher Hatun, who bore him 2 children. He is called Rumi, meaning Anatolian, because Anatolia used to be called the land of Rum, or the Romans. He also gained the title of Mevlana, which means our master, through his life's work there.
To call him Rumi emphasizes, in a sense, the Western aspect. Rum is the Byzantine Empire. When he lived, where he lived was still largely Christian. It had only recently been conquered by the Muslims. So the population was still largely Christian, largely connected in some way with the West. So we call him Rumi, which is in a sense to westernize him. But his given name was Muhammad. And in much of the Islamic literature, he's not referred to as Rumi. He's referred to as Muhammad Jalaluddin Balkhi. He was from Balkh, which is actually not from the western part of the Islamic realm, but the eastern part. So we've kind of westernized him by calling him Rumi. And we've removed the Muhammad from him. And so much of the literature that we in the West read about Rumi diminishes his Islamic roots. Before he met Shamsi Tabriz and discovered fully the mystical path, he studied law He studied the essential Islamic sciences, and he was throughout his life rooted in those. Shamsi Tabriz enabled him to move beyond those, but not to negate them, not to forget them. So we Westerners tend to take Rumi as the mystic without the Islam. And we treasure those passages, those few passages, in which he seems to negate religious differences. He says, whether Hindu, whether Christian, whether Buddhist or Zoroastrian or whatever, it makes no difference. And in one sense, that's true. These are part of the world of form. But in another sense, one has to pass through that world of form, through the particularity of religion, and that's important. For me, as a Christian, to read Rumi, I do not want to read him in a way that negates his Islam, that Christianizes him, because I then lose one of the richest parts of that dialogue, of that interaction, which is an interaction of Christian particularity with Islamic particularity. If I negate that particularity, the uniqueness of each tradition, its own particular form and pattern and history, then I lose the importance, the value of the conversation. It becomes chit-chat, in a sense. So it's important to remember that Jalaluddin Rumi is Muhammad Jalaluddin Rumi, and to engage in the particularity of and the uniqueness of that particular source of his knowledge.
When his father, Bahauddin Veled, passed away in 1231, Rumi succeeded him as professor in religious sciences at the largest theological school in Konya. Only 24 years old, Rumi was already an accomplished scholar in religious and positive sciences. Although Rumi had already succeeded to his father's position as a teacher, when the great scholar and Sufi Burhanuddin al-Tirmizi arrived in Konya, Rumi studied under him and devoted himself to his service for 9 years. This training was focused on divine love, worship, austerity and abstinence, piety, consciousness of God, humility and tolerance, which are the foundations of Sufism. Rumi spent his days mostly praying and serving people who came to visit the Sufi center, preparing food for them, collecting wood for cooking and heating, and cleaning the toilets and bathrooms used by visitors. He thus learned the merit of serving people, and knew that serving people is ultimately serving God.
Insight and education, of course, came from the influence of his father. But when his father died, he took the mantle of his father and expanded on the scholarship and the theology of his father.
Mother and father inculcated in him the basics of the Sufi path, the importance of reading the Quran and learning it, of fasting, of separating yourself from the things of this world. And they taught him kindness and respect and love of fellow human beings. He grew up in a household that had many visitors, and they welcomed everybody. They never left anyone out, and his father always made sure that everyone left with something. So Rumi was brought up in a very giving and very educated family.
The origin and roots of Sufism lie in the life and practices of the Prophet of Islam and the Quran. Sufism espouses a well-founded and thoroughgoing interpretation of Islam, which focuses on love, tolerance, worship of God, community development, and personal development through self-discipline and responsibility. A Sufi's way of life is to love and be of service to people, deserting the ego or false self and all illusion so that one can reach maturity and perfection and finally reach Allah, the true, the real.
Sufism is a path to God, as I understand it. It's the inner core of Islam. It is a path to God which is of religion, but not a religion. It's a path of the heart to God. It's a purification of the heart. Someone once said that there's 70,000 veils separating us from God. And I view Sufism as the removal, one by one, of these veils. And there's stages and steps that one goes through. And so one could say it's a purification of the heart. It's getting rid of anything that separates you from God so that there's room for nothing else but remembrance of God in your heart. Sufis live in this world, but they seek a deeper meaning of this world, of the life in this world. They live in this world. They're of this world. They're in this world, but not of the world.
It is simply the ways developed by Sufis to reach God, acquire His love, and thus to purify and train oneself and become a perfect human being, become a true human being. While Sufism expresses the theoretical or philosophical aspect of this search, its practical aspect is usually referred to as being a dervish. Dervish literally means the sill of the door. It is a word that describes the Sufi who is at the door to enlightenment.
Sham, and his influence evidently was a revolutionary influence, because he evidently was already a part of the Sufi tradition, and therefore was concentrated more on the heart and on the ecstasy of moving toward unity with God, whereas Rumi had been raised in the discussions that were primarily influenced by Aristotle and this kind of thinking.
Throughout his mature life as a sheikh, he always had a companion. For a mere 4 years or so, it was this key figure, Shamsi Tabriz, about whom we know not a great deal. He was the one who helped Rumi move beyond the very literate academic study of the Islamic tradition to a spirituality focused on the love of God, that put all the books aside and focused on losing himself. Shamsuddin helped him make that transition. And then Shamsuddin disappeared. He actually disappeared 3 times, I think. And having, in a sense, accomplished what he needed to with Rumi, or what Rumi needed, for him to have stayed would have held Rumi back. But even after 1248, it didn't end there. But then there was also an external mirror. Salahuddin, for 10 years, had a special role with Rumi. And then after Salahuddin died in perhaps 1258 or so, then it was Husamuddin. So there was also always a partner, and that's different from what we hear among the other mystics. The importance of a partner, the importance of a mirror of the soul, that in our own spiritual journeys, we can't just do it alone. We need this partner of the soul, even though the journey is a solitary journey. It is to be alone with the alone.
Bullen says, the most famous and probably the most fruitful relationship in his development was with Shamsi Tabriz, whom he met in Konya at the suggestion of Ruknuddin Zarkubi. Modern historians may argue about who influenced whom in their long association, but this is not profitable. What we know is that for a particular period of time, two skillful and acute spirits came together, and by sharing the divine bounties and gifts they received from their Lord, they reached peaks that most would not be able to reach easily on their own. To this day, the place where the two first met in Konya is known as Mark al-Bahrain, the meeting point of the two oceans. Through their spiritual cooperation, they enlightened those of their own age and have also influenced all the centuries which followed. I am like Mejnun in my poor heart, which is without limbs, because I have no strength to contest the love of God. Every day and night I continue in my efforts to free myself from the bonds of the chain of love, a chain which keeps me imprisoned. When the dream of the beloved begins, I find myself in blood. Because I am not fully conscious, I am afraid, and that I may paint him with the blood of my heart. In fact, you, O beloved, must ask the fairies. They know how I have burned through the night. Everyone has gone to sleep. But I, the one who has given his heart to you, do not know sleep like them. Throughout the night, my eyes look at the sky, counting the stars. His love so profoundly took my sleep that I do not really believe it will ever come back. If the spirit of the anthology of Rumi's poems, which are the essence of love, passion, divine presence, and excitement, were to be extracted, what would exude are the cries of love, longing, and hope. Throughout his life, Rumi expressed love, and in turn he believed he was beloved because of this. Accordingly, he spoke of his love and relationship with God. When he did so, he was not alone. He took along with him many blessed individuals who were his audience. He assumed it to be a requisite of loyalty to offer, cup by cup, the drinks presented to him on the heavenly table to others who were in his circle of light. As to the relevance of Rumi today, we could say that Rumi emerged in a period in which disorders, conflicts, extremism, and exploitation lay heavy on the people. During this period, Rumi proved himself to be a powerful character and scholar. Not only did he talk about, but he also produced an atmosphere of dialogue, compassion, and leniency through his message and lyrics. His understanding clarifies the relation of human beings to their Creator, and one's relation to other fellow beings. Rumi utilized the reed flute, music, lyrics, and poetry to call and collect people around his message. With the breath of the reed flute and songs, he would breathe his own soul and understanding into people in order to make them live in peace, harmony, respect, prosperity, and eternal bliss, here and in the hereafter. Therefore, there were very many people of other faiths around Rumi, listening to him and respecting him for what he was teaching.